The theme that I'm working on that's of interest to me, and I think can be of interest to you, because I've had so many conversations based on this theme and corollaries of this theme, which is why I want to talk about the theme directly for a few moments. Then I have a handout prepared for you of what I think we should do instead of Jewish theology, maybe a little bit of wrap up, and then leave time for plenty of questions. So let me start by what we mean by Jewish theology, Jewish philosophy. It's typically because there's pressure from the outside to explain it because of some system that is seen to be a challenge to what you might call, from my perspective, Judaism from the inside, which is the study of our very various and diverse texts with many different teachings, contradictory teachings. We have the Bible, we have the Midrash, we have the Talmud, we have Kabbalah, Hasidic literature. You know, it's not a symphony, it's a cacophony that we try to make jazz from it. But when you go into these texts and you follow down the wormholes, it's just an extraordinary experience. And by the way, with a website like Sefaria.com, and anybody can walk into the orchard of the wonder of Jewish texts. There's so many teachers, so much online. Whatever you want to study, it's out there. So as I look at the history of Jewish, so-called Jewish philosophy, I'll start with the, you probably don't know who this is. Saadia Gaon is oftentimes seen as our first philosopher, lived in Babylonia in the 9th century, if not mistaken. He had a pretty thorough philosophy, but he's responding to Arabic philosophy, Islamic philosophy, which is responding to the discovery of Aristotle and Plato. And the discovery of Aristotle and Plato was a profound and disturbing phenomenon to Islam. Now, Christianity was born within the Hellenistic milieu. So Christianity had already been dealing with mostly Platonism, Neoplatonism already from the beginning. You see this in the Gospel of John mostly. You see it in the letters of Paul, and of course in development of early Christianity with a variety of different kinds of heresies. I talked about that a lot when I did my spiritual psychology of Kabbalah, where Kabbalah came from. Well, the very earliest dimensions of Jewish mysticism were in the realm of what early Christians called heresy, especially the Gnostic heresies. So they've been read out of what you might call traditional Christian theology. But as people have gone back into the thought around early Christianity and not making a judgment whether it's heresy or not, just what did early Christians think? Well, there's a lot of diversity in early Christian thought if we don't just default to the official thought as was decided when the New Testament was canonized, when Christian orthodoxy was established at the Council of Nicaea, for example. So what I tried to do during that time was share with you the vast text of Christian Gnosticism, Christian heresy, Christian Neoplatonism. And Christianity had already worked its way through this. By the way, there are many Christian theologians today, I think especially Elaine Pagels, Pagels, who was one of the first people to take the Gnostic Gospels discovered in Egypt in 1945 and present them to the non-scholarly world. Well, it made an incredible impression upon people. And she was stunned that she was getting brought to churches to speak. So here's a person who discovered the writings of Christian heresy and was asked to teach at Christian divinity schools and was asked to teach at churches because people were interested in not what they were told to believe, but what a vast number of Christians believe that didn't get it through the, you might say, the censor of what is theologically orthodox, and let people themselves discover first, second, third century Christianity and let them decide what they should do with this. So what theology was in early Christianity was an attempt to set the record straight, as it were. You know, the orthodox means straight belief. So in my opinion, as I study so-called Christian heresy, Christian Gnosticism, I find it so interesting and so inspiring, as you know, if you followed those talks that I gave, because in many ways, in my mind, they formed the basis of what became the Kabbalah. So we'll put that aside for a moment. Just with this thought that oftentimes what theology does is it reads out things that those who are in charge of the tradition don't want you to read, which I think for the modern mind is already problematic. We don't want people telling us what we can and can't read. Well, that's what theology does in a way. Now, when you get up to the Islamic world, the Islamic philosophy had no encounter with Aristotle and Plato until they come out of the Arabian Peninsula. They go into Syria, where there's a great tradition of Hellenistic thought. Christians either translated into Arabic, or they're Christians who became Muslim, learned Arabic. And suddenly this vast literature of Aristotelianism and Plato and Aristotle, I'll say for convenience sake. And it was profoundly disturbing that if you read Aristotle on its own, when you read Plato on its own, they clearly have discovered a truth, a way to the truth of things, a way to understanding reality, both physical and metaphysical. And then you have the Quran. And what do you do with this? So Islamic philosophy is born out of the confrontation of Greek thought, which is just trying to understand reality, and a revealed tradition where you might say reality is somewhat already defined because they have a revealed text. But then you have this other tradition, Hellenistic thought, Aristotle and Plato, and out of that comes Islamic philosophy. And then Saadia Gaon, who is a Jew, Arabic speaking, lives in Babylonia, lives in Iraq, and he writes a Jewish version of the response to Plato and Aristotle. He's good, but according to Maimonides, he's not great. Maimonides is very critical of Saadia Gaon. Now, Maimonides lives from 1135 to 1204, and it's well to see him, as I mentioned last time, in the milieu of Islamic philosophy, meaning he spoke Arabic, he wrote in Arabic, the Guide for the Perplexed is written in Arabic, and he's taking the view of what we'll call for now Islamic philosophy, widely understood. We'll put Jewish philosophy in there. What do you do with a revealed text in the face of Plato and Aristotle? Now, I've read Maimonides. I've studied the Mishnah Torah. It's a fantastic summary of Jewish law and Jewish jurisprudence. I've read the Guide for the Perplexed, but it wasn't my question. My question is not how to reconcile the Bible with Plato and Aristotle. It's just not my question. First of all, I don't believe the Torah that we have is the very word of God. So it's not as if we have the word of God here, the path to truth here. I think I understand how the Bible came into being. And I don't need to run the Bible through the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. I'm not an Aristotelian. First of all, I mean, I revere Aristotle, but his questions are not my questions. There's a lot of wisdom in Aristotle when you read Aristotle's Poetics, and when you read his rhetoric, and the things that more have to do with language and how meaning is created. Other parts of Aristotle, for example, ethics, for me, it doesn't get to the core of the question of ethics, which is what you might call the obligation to do the right thing and how you figure what the right thing is. I don't recall Aristotle talking that way. Plato I'm very interested in because Plato has the idea of a metaphysical world, for example, of love, justice, truth, and beauty that emanates down into the consciousness of the human being. And then we have to learn how to translate this you might say, divine consciousness, how we try to have it fill our beings, shape our inner lives around the experience of the divine, and then channel that out to the world. Well, that's a Platonic idea. I think it's a profoundly Jewish idea. If you look at the Psalms and Proverbs and other places, we have the same question. How do you appropriate the inner Torah? You might say the inner teaching of God, make it part of your life, make it part of your mentality, your spirituality, your morality, and channel out to the world. So one reason I love Plato is because I see Plato and biblical rabbinic Judaism as working on the same project. How do you experience the divine? How do you allow it to transform you? How do you bring it out into your life? And especially, when life hurts, when life cracks, when life creaks. You see, reading Maimonides didn't help me through my own suffering as a human being. Reading Maimonides didn't help me in my search for truth. Hasidic Judaism helped me, which has a very somewhat Platonic feel, because as a Kabbalistic feel, and you remember that Kabbalah is very much a kind of a Neoplatonism. So I see the deeper spirituality of the Bible and Plato in a way running parallel to each other until they meet. In fact, as you know, I have some theories that biblical Judaism and Greek thought met long before Plato, but I'll share with you that another time, if somebody's interested, I can talk about it now. So in any case, I don't have Maimonides' problem. So as I've been reading the Cambridge Companion to Jewish Philosophy, I remember studying this, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to be a theologian. These are not my questions. So one reason I resist theology is it's trying to systemize something instead of letting us experience it in its unruly, wild way. It doesn't speak to my soul, and I don't need our tradition organized for me. I would rather jump into the great cavern of the disorganization of text rather than have someone simplify it for me. By the way, if you want to read the greatest disorganized Jewish text, it really would have to be the Zohar. Anybody who's read the Zohar, by the way, you know, I'm taking a class on Zohar here in Tel Aviv. I want to come back and teach the class because it has really been extraordinary. It's a gifted teacher, has a doctorate in Zohar, very spiritual person, great ability to weave the text. I'm watching this room filled with secular Israelis who are just stunned watching one spiritual horizon open up after the other in this classroom. And I think it's the teacher has chosen a stunning text that unfolds very slowly. I want to I'll bring it home with me. I'm creating handouts, and I'll make sure to teach that. So that's my preference, is to go into that world. Now, the last thing I want to say before I get to my handout is one of the ways that Jewish theology has been organized, since ancient times all the way to modern Jewish theology, with Franz Rosenzweig, modern theologians like Heschel and others, is the idea of God as creator, revealer, redeemer. We have this in the prayer book. We have the prayers at the beginning of the Shemanis blessings. God is the creator of the universe, creator of light, revealer of Torah, and redemption of the people of Israel. But if you know more Bible and more Midrash, creation is a very complex idea. That's what I'll be talking about today a little bit. The creation of the human being is a very complex idea, not so simple. Revelation and redemption. So when we say God is creator, revealer, redeemer, it's as if we're being asked to not talk about the difficulties with those issues. Okay, so the first thing I'm saying is the study of, I recommend everybody study some Jewish theology, but I don't think it's going to answer your question, the search for truth, because you may not have the same question that philosophers have, which is organizing Jewish thought against some outside force like Aristotle, Plato, Kant, Hegel, or something else. I know those people. I don't need to answer them. What I want to do is use our tradition to forge my path to the divine through this tradition, because I find this tradition absolutely sufficient for my spiritual path. Any quick questions on just that idea? That I'm not saying don't know Jewish theology, but your time is better spent entering into the wondrous orchard or the wondrous cavern of Jewish text. Okay, I see let's see. I do hope. Okay, I can't see the whole. Let's see. Okay. That I will explain the connections between timelines of Jewish biblical thought. Okay, let me try to do that at the end. So I have a super duper handout ready. So I'm going to see, in the old days, remember I used to do share screen and put text up? I'm going to try to do that today. Y'all ready? See if this works? Boom. All right. Okay, so I'm critiquing the idea of creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing, which is a standard part of Jewish theology, Jewish philosophy, everything sin that talks about God as creator of the world from nothing. So I've put here, I've done this many times, but I'm doing it in a more organized way now. That's actually not what Genesis 1 says. So I'm translating straight from the Hebrew now. In the beginning of Elohim's creating the heaven and the earth. It does not say in Hebrew, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It just doesn't say that in Hebrew. Why did they translate that way? Already in the early Greek translations of the Hebrew text, because they wanted it to line up with Aristotle. Aristotle was already influencing how the Bible was translated into Greek. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth is what the Septuagint says, the early Greek translation of the Bible. But the Bible says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So they even changed the vocalization. Instead of Bereshit bara Elohim, they changed it to Bereshit bara Elohim, which is grammatically impossible. Trust my translation. If you read any modern translation of the Bible, it will say, when Elohim began to create the heavens and the earth, or in the beginning of Elohim's creating the heavens and the earth. So it's not chronological. It's, as it were, an event. Then it says almost parenthetically, and at that time, as it were, Va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, and that earth, which was already there, by the way, when God began creating the heavens and the earth, parenthetically, the earth, by the way, was tohu vavohu. Talk about that a little bit this morning. Choshech al panei tehom, there was darkness, and there was over the face of the abyss, there was an abyss. And there was Ruach Elohim Merachefet al Panei Hamayim, and there was a spirit of Elohim on the face of the water. Where'd the water come from? So this is not the order of creation, it's telling us what it was like when God began to create, when in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. So what does the word create mean? Now, I don't have time to do this today, but I did a video that I'll make better. I think I put it on Instagram or TikTok or something. The word create in Hebrew also means to shape, form, or clear out a forest. It doesn't mean in most places in the Bible to create from nothing, but to take something and shape it. So a synonym of bara is yatzar, which means to shape. So for example, in Isaiah, it says, God is yotzer or Uvorei choshech, shaper of light, creator of darkness. Notice, yotzer or, borei choshech, shaper of light, creator of darkness. So yotzer and borei are synonyms. And then it says, yotzer or, uvorei choshech, oseh shalom, makes peace. That's another synonym. Yotzer, shape, borei, shape or create. Oseh, make. Oseh shalom, and then it says in Isaiah, disturbingly, uborei et hara, and creates evil. I don't like that text, but it's there. Okay, it's hard for me to even believe that, but I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. So borei does not mean create from nothing. It's the synonym of borei is yotzer, shape, and the synonym of borei is oseh, make. So yotzer, shape, borei, shape or make, oseh, shape or make, they're all synonyms. So it doesn't mean in the beginning God created, but rather in the beginning of God's shaping, forming, making the heavens and the earth. Now, why does that? And then it goes straight to the earth. Heavens we're going to leave alone. Notice that heavens are left out. It says, and the earth. Now you know why the earth was in need of shaping, because the earth was tohu vavohu. And here it means something like chaos and empty. That's why it needed shaping. And so the Genesis chapter 1 is not what almost every Jewish theologian says, creation from nothing, but rather God creating the chaos of what is called haaretz. It was there. It was chaotic. It was tohu vavohu. And God comes in and shapes it up. That's what Genesis chapter 1 says. Now, if you came to one of the Shabbat meetups, you'll know this next verse. What is this tohu vavohu? The only time in the entire Bible that tohu vavohu is used, the only time I can find that these two words exist together is in Jeremiah 4:22-23. This is the same Jeremiah we read this morning. He's complaining about the people and says, my people are stupid. They give me no heed. They are foolish children. They are not intelligent. They're clever at doing wrong, unable to do right. I look at the earth, it is tohu vavohu. The skies, their light is gone. So Jeremiah is, you might say, the flip side of Genesis 1. In fact, I believe that Jeremiah actually wrote Genesis 1. Okay, so he's saying, in the beginning, God shaped the heavens and the earth. The earth was tohu vavohu and created light. Why? Because in Jeremiah's time, he says, I look at the earth and it's tohu vabohu. And I look to the skies, there's no light. So Genesis 1 is a response to Jeremiah 4. That's my understanding of the Bible. So I don't say, when we talk about God as creator, I don't say God created the world from nothing. I would say, and again, so this is not a theology, it's just my reading of these two texts. There are many others. The understanding of God presented by Jeremiah in Genesis 1, I believe Jeremiah wrote Genesis 1, is a God who's facing chaos, but especially because of Jeremiah 4, moral chaos, a world falling apart. And when we read the collapse of civilizations, and there have been many throughout history, just try to imagine being in a time when civilization is collapsing and you can't stop it. You know things are going very badly. Or even in your own life, things are going badly. The chaos is creeping in. That's Jeremiah 4. Jeremiah, in a response to his own writings, is saying there is a divine that can bring order to the chaos. There is a divine that can create an order out of the chaos and emptiness, and can create good out of evil. So I wouldn't say God is creator. I would say, look at Genesis 1, look at Jeremiah 4, and you tell me what God is. I just want to put one more section up here. Isaiah also uses the word tohu vavohu, but not right next to each other. Now, this is this is Isaiah's prophecy of vengeance against those who have attacked Israel. Now, look at this horrible vengeance. God's day of retribution, vindication of Zion, streams shall be turned into pitch, soils to sulfur, land will become burning pitch. So this is the Eretz completely, you might say, in that tohu vabohu state. Through the ages, it will be in ruins. Through the aeons, none will traverse it. So it's gone back to, as it were, an eternal ruin, tohu vabohu. And then it says, God will measure it with a line of tohu, which means, this, as I mentioned before, it's a Salvador Dali painting. It can't even be measured in a rational way. With weights of bohu, when they would do equal weights and measures, the weights are empty. So look how brilliantly Isaiah uses the terms tohu vavohu. The line is tohu, the weights are bohu, referring to the enemies of Israel that God, through God's vengeance, will completely destroy. Now, I don't believe in a vengeful God. I don't believe God brought vengeance. But in Isaiah's mind, he's turning the land of the enemies of the Israelites into the world before creation. So the world before creation, tohu vavohu, is used by the prophets to describe a world of chaos out of which an ordered world goes, and a world of chaos into which our ordered world goes if we human beings don't listen to the divine voice. Okay, so see, this is much more rich to me than saying God created the world out of nothing. That's almost meaningless to me. This is meaningful to me. This takes me to some deep and dark places in the human condition. And then seeing how Jeremiah tries to reverse this and saying, even though we can slip into chaos and emptiness, a divine actually goes into the chaos and emptiness, orders it, and brings light. So reading these two at the same time, we have a sense of both our own disorder and emptiness, you might say, and the divine presence that brings us order and gives us substance. Okay, so we have this great interplay here. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, you've all heard of Tselem Elohim. I mean, it's a very big thing that we're created in the divine image. How much Jewish philosophy and theology has to do with we are created in God's image. I've said it, I've used it, it's a wonderful idea. But then many years ago, I began to look at the word Tselem, image, and I realized that the root of the word Tselem, image, is tsel, which means shadow. So I went and I looked for a biblical verse that still has that has the idea of Tselem and shadow. So if you look at Psalms 39, 5-7, by the way, it's a very disturbing psalm. I don't want to read it this morning because I don't want to take anybody to a dark place, but Psalm 39 is a very, very dark psalm. The writer is suffering very deeply. And then the writer of Psalm 39 reflects and says, Ach b'tselem yithalech ish, ach hevel yehemiyun. But in the tselem, darkness, a person walks about, even in vain he murmurs. So tselem, shadow, and hevel, vanity, are parallel. Now try to imagine when it says, in the tselem of Elohim, God created, that here in Psalm 39, tselem means empty shadow. It's a synonym of hevel, which means vanity and emptiness. So when people say tselem Elohim, I know what they mean. The dignity of the human being, it's in rabbinic literature, it's used by many people. There's a dark side to the idea of tselem Elohim, which is that a shadow indicates an absence of the real thing. You know, the real thing shines on something. Over here we have the shadow. What does the shadow indicate? That the substantial thing is not there, just the outline of the substantial thing. Now, many people thought, well, that's quite a reach, Rabbi Finley. Well, look at Psalms 39, and you tell me if that's actually not one of the meanings. So now, we're brought back into these two polarities. On one hand, yes, we are created somehow spiritually in the image of the divine. We don't know exactly what that means. And on the other hand, we're a mere shadow of the divine. They're both true. So yes, when I want to talk about the dignity of the human being and human rights, I will use the term tselem Elohim. It's the agreed upon term. Human beings are in the image of God. Therefore, we are rights endowed people. Therefore, human dignity must be preserved. I believe it. I use the term. But among us, where I want to say, let's confront these texts in a deeper way. Let's go into the caverns of Jewish texts. Let's go into the orchard of Jewish texts. There are some dark parts of that orchard. There are some parts of that cavern that are not lit up. I don't want to back away from it. I want us to confront it, and then we decide what we want to do with it. Last text I wanted to share with you, which for me is a wonderful account of creation. This is in the Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah 8:5. It's a wonderful, playful Midrash, and this is Rabbi Shimon. I've condensed it. Rabbi Shimon says, at the time God to create the first human, the ministering angels formed themselves into groups. Kitot has a sense of sex. S-E-C-T-S. One said, create. The other said, don't create. As it is written in Psalm 85:11, kindness and truth met, justice and peace kiss. Now, who would have known that Psalm 85:11 has to do with angels arguing with each other and kissing each other? Okay, so the Midrash fills it out. Kindness said, the angel of kindness said, create, because they can be kind to each other. The angel of truth said, don't create, because they're liars. So God says, I want to create. And so the angels get in front of God and they start to argue with God. One says, create them. One says, don't create them. Justice said, create them. They do justice. Peace said, don't create them, because all they do is argue all the time. So the ministering angels come to God and they're arguing with God, and they have divided into two groups. One group says create, one says don't create, each of them because of their nature. So kindness and truth say one thing, and justice and peace say another. Okay, so they're all arguing with each other. What did God do? He looked at truth and threw it to the ground. What's this? The proof for this? Daniel chapter 8, verse 12. And he threw the earth, the truth to the earth. Okay. Now, so that's a great verse, by the way. I can imagine they're in the Midrash and someone says, hey, there's a verse in Daniel that's going to fit really well into your drash. They go, oh my God, I can't believe it. He threw truth to the earth. But think about this. Why does God throw truth to the earth? Because what they're saying is right. We do lie. We are argumentative. Being in Israel right now, wow, this has reached a fever pitch. And, my point of view is whoever's right on this judicial reform, I just wish they'd lower the rhetoric. I just wish they'd lower the rhetoric. We don't have to be so bitter about it. Well, people choose to be bitter. That's this. And so God, as it were, throws truth to the ground because he says, I know you're right, and I don't want to hear it. So here we have the image of God saying, I don't want to hear the truth. I can't handle the truth. Okay? Isn't this an amazing midrashic understanding of God? God can't take the truth. The ministering angels then say to God, truth is one of your best treasures. So look at the next part. The angel said to God, Master of the universe, why are you insulting your royal treasure called truth? raise it up. And then you go to Psalms 85:12, truth will sprout from the earth. Now, if you went over to Psalm 85:12 and you read, truth will sprout from the earth, it would never occur to you, why is truth sprouting from the earth? Because God threw truth to the earth, because that guy couldn't take the truth. The ministering angel said, hey, that's an overreaction. God says, fine. So the truth sprouts from the earth. It's playful, it's crazy, but there's a deep part of this. For God to create the human being, God had to not listen to truth, because the truth is we can be wonderful and we can be pretty awful. So this is all happening. So when it says God created a human being, here's the backstory. Here's, as it were, midrashically, what was really happening. So now it's going to wind up. So Rabbi Simon says, well, what does the word very mean? When it said God saw all that God had made, and behold, it was very good. Rabbi Shimon says, very refers to the human being. Hine tov ma'od. Hine tov, it was good. Ma'od means that's the human being. So Rabbi Shimon says, Hine tov hadam, the human being's good. Whatever that means. We have kindness and we have unkindness, and we're litigious and mean. We do justice. And then we strive for contention. And the sum of it is, there's something in God says, but they're good. Now, for me, this is a very Kabbalistic idea where God says, they're broken, but they're good. And so this is my reading Kabbalah onto this Midrash. I'm going to create them so they can take this shattered, fractured human being and restore the balance and become good. So good, as it were, is an aspiration, not a beginning place. So so what happens? Rabbi Shimon says, actually, they're good. Okay, now we get back to the story. The great Rav Huna of Tziporin said, while the ministering angels were arguing with each other and dealing with each other, it says, Midayanim elu im elu umit askim elu in elu, where they're arguing and dealing with each other, the Holy One created the human being behind their back. He said to them, what are you arguing about? The human being has already been created. He says, Amar lehem, atem midayanim kavar nasa adam. The human being was already created. Now, so when I say we are in Tselem Elohim, God creates the human being in God's image, you look at Psalm 39, you look at this Midrash, see, this is, to me, so much more wonderful than Jewish theology. Jewish theology, as it were, solves a problem. When you go into the text, the problem of the human condition flourishes right in front of you. So for me, the Bible and our tradition is not theology, as you know, it's philosophic anthropology. It's the biblical authors, it's the Midrash authors, the Talmudic authors, the authors of the Zohar, dealing with the human condition, trying to understand it, producing texts. I think people were touched by God, their texts are touched by God, delivering these texts over to us and saying, you figure it out. We're going to give you this orchard of contradictory poetry. We're going to deposit it into history. You study and you figure it out. We're not going to do it for you. So my big problems with Jewish theology, and I'm well versed in it. I've taught it and I love to teach it. It's solving problems for us that instead we should face them. We should break our hearts on these problems. These problems should, as it were, tear our hearts apart so the light can get in, which is why I'm calling the title of my talk today, Cracks in Theology is Where the Light Gets In. Thank you, Leonard Cohen.